The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
Short Time Wrestling Podcast time here again. My name is Jason Bryant. Yeah, didn't do any short time shots over the weekend because, as you may notice, a sound difference. I'm working on completing a new studio setup in terms of processing boards, mixers, microphones, etc. I added the microphone not that long ago. Now I have a new mixer. I have a new interface in terms of how I'm editing the show. I got 3 screens in front of me. It's a little bit daunting. So that is the reason why I haven't done any short time shots the last couple days. If you are just checking this show out for the first time, again, my name is Jason Bryant. I've been a wrestling journalist for over 20 years, have many leather-bound books, and do things usually involving microphones and writing and research. And we'll be talking research today on the show, as well as a big event coming up on December 15th and 16th at the University of Indianapolis. That is the Midwest Classic. Jason Warthan and Jackie Paquette of the University of Indianapolis will be joining the show just in about a minute or two. As I get some housekeeping out of the way, again, you can rate, review, subscribe. If you like what you're going to hear, go to mattalkonline.com and /listen. That'll give you an opportunity to subscribe through various different types of podcasting platforms, podcatchers, as we nerds like to say in the podcasting world. Apple Podcast, probably the most significant. Those of you who have iPhone devices or iOS devices, yep, that blue, or not blue, it's purple. The purple podcast icon, that's where you go click. And you can also go to mattalkonline.com/get-short-time. That'll take you right to it on your iOS device. Now, if you've got iOS and you don't really want to mess with the podcast world of that particular app and you like doing things a little differently, well, I've got an app specifically for this show on iOS and Android. Yes, it is the Short Time Wrestling Podcast app. It is free. You can download it, available in the Google Play Store or in the App Store. That's what you need to do. A couple shout-outs. I'd like to thank John McCarty for a contribution to the Matt Talk Podcast Network, and Ralph Wetzel, who sent me a nice note along the way. So thanks for you two and your support again, doing it the traditional way with either a link via the PayPal contribution link at mattalkonline.com/contribute, or just typical old mail. If you want to drop me something, you can do that by going to mattalkonline.com/join the team or patreon.com/mattalkonline. Yes, this is a sales pitch before you even get to the show, but that's how you can support this network and support this show. Now, it's showtime, and this ain't the Apollo. And today on the Short Time Wrestling Podcast, we're going to be talking Division II wrestling with the Midwest Classic coming up December 15th and 16th on the campus of the University of Indianapolis. Our guest today, Jason Warthan, head wrestling coach at the University of Indianapolis. That's UIndy. They are the Greyhounds. And also joining us, senior women's administrator, the associate AD for student support and community engagement, as well as handling the duties of sports info for men's and women's tennis and wrestling, Jackie Paquette. Lady and gentlemen, welcome to the Short Time Wrestling Podcast.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
So, 40 years. Jason, I'm going to start with you. This is your 10th year as the head wrestling coach at your alma mater. You wrestled in this. This is a big thing. Jackie's done a good job at telling the story on social, but those who haven't seen it at Midwest_Classic yet, that's a hint for you guys to follow. The story about, wrestling in this as an athlete and now taking the lead on how to run and manage this event. What's it mean for you, and what's it mean for the program specifically?
Oh, when I got hired 10 years ago, it was a little bit in transition as far as the Midwest. It used to be a second semester tournament. I think year one and possibly year two, we had that as a second semester tournament. In fact, the first year we ran it, we went to a off-site location because there was a conference basketball game. And so since then, and Jackie's certainly helped with that, we've been able to kind of take the lead and make sure that we have this facility. We pushed it to first semester, and we have grown the tournament leaps and bounds from what it was 10 years ago, and certainly when I wrestled in it in the late 90s and early 2000s. But it has always been a prestigious event. I think you kind of hit on something with social media. Back in the day when I wrestled in it, we knew of the Central Oklahomas and the Shattering States and basically by reputation, but we didn't know what individual wrestlers, or it was harder to follow along on what Division II wrestling had to offer. Social media and technology has come such a far way since those times. I joke with my guys that when I was in college, that email was just starting. That it was much harder to communicate back then. But since then, gosh, I'm sitting in front of a laptop with 40 schools with rosters and looking. We've been looking through data and matches and trying to put some sort of order to this for seeds here for this weekend. So it's an awesome event. It's also very stressful to run this type of event.
And just looking at the preliminaries, as we're coming off the Division I Las Vegas, Cliff King Las Vegas Invitational, where it was talked about that over 100 of the 200 ranked wrestlers, at least on Flow Wrestling's rankings, were in the field. You're looking at this field, 120 ranked in Division II, so they rank 12 per weight, 60. Right now, and that includes the scratches. So initial numbers were higher than that, but there's been some scratches. So half of the Division II ranked wrestlers in the country will be at the Midwest Classic. So, you're talking about social media, but now with the growth of Division II wrestling, with more programs being added and schools reclassifying from the NAI into Division II, the opportunity to see these teams, is less likely. So a tournament like this also, that familiarity you were talking about, you're going to be able to see a team. So all the teams from the Rocky Mountain region and the new programs like in Arkansas.
Yeah, right. So, this, our regionals changed from 4 regions to 6 regions for this year. And with having, they're going to take 3 national qualifiers from each region. So you have 18-man brackets now at the Division II national tournament. So it was important to the coaches that we would seed the national tournament. And so that makes an event like the Midwest Classic even more important for teams out west and teams out east and from the north to come. And that way, a seed may come down to what happens this weekend. So, we grew the tournament even from last year from, I think, 35, 36 teams last year to 40 this year. So it continues to grow. And at some point, we have always said any Division II program has an invite to the Midwest Classic. I don't know how much more we can grow this thing, though. If we start getting at 60 teams or something, we're going to have to rent out a field house or something.
And also looking at the field, I mean, I'm looking in the past, there's been some NAI schools that have jumped in and whatnot. And so I'm just eyeballing it here real quick. I see pretty much an entirely Division II field. Is that correct?
We have one NAI program with Marion, which is just up the road from us, and our friends up there. So, that's the only NAI program. Davenport, which will be a full member next year, they're coming in. But outside of that, everyone is Division II.
And it's 16 of the top 25 Division II programs.
Gnarly. And the thing is, those are using tournament points. So that's actually pretty relevant for a tournament. It's not like you've got the 12th ranked team in the country that has one ranked guy at a dual meet. You're looking at the tournament points. This is how Division II does them. And so looking at those rankings, that's like, all right, that's a pretty good indication of what we might see on the mats.
Yeah, this tournament is crazy. I mean, we talk about, this is almost a Midwest All-American type of thing. Is we need to change the title when we award the 8 best at the end of it to All-American status. I mean, it's that tough of a tournament. We'll have national champions that will not win this tournament. We've even had national champions that didn't make it to the second day of this tournament and legitimately lost 2 matches on the first day. So it's always fun. From an outside perspective, it's a lot of excitement. Right now it's a mixed bag for me, which I still have a lot of work to start putting this thing together. So, but it is exciting times.
Jackie, just shifting gears on what you've been doing to promote this thing. You started a 40 days leading into the 40th annual, and there are stats upon stats upon stats that you've been throwing out here. And what was the idea behind doing something like this, a Twitter countdown 40 days out for the 40th anniversary?
So the history of Division II wrestling is something that I've been getting deeply involved with, and Midwest is such a big part of that history. And through talking to some of the other coaches and some of the key people in Division II wrestling, just thought it would be really fun to throw some things out there to, allow programs to showcase their history a little bit, talk about some programs that don't sponsor wrestling any longer and get their history out there a little bit, as well as the history of the tournament, as we go into the 40th year. It is a big milestone. We're going to try to celebrate it a little bit, and just thought actually building a record book and being able to share some of that history would be a good way to do that.
And this is just one of many hats you wear there. First of all, explain what senior women's administrator means for those who are unfamiliar with the dynamics of college athletics.
The senior women administrator is a designation that each NCAA institution needs to have. It's basically a way to give a female a seat at the table, a seat at the decision-making table within the athletics department. I've been the senior woman administrator here at UIndy for 6 years, and our athletic director is actually a female as well. But in her position, she is able to give that designation to another female in the department.
Now, Jason, from your perspective as a Division II wrestling coach, Jackie's won previous award from the National Wrestling Media Association for Small College SID of the Year. You've got something a lot of schools don't have, and that's an attentive and wrestling-minded sports information director.
Yeah, it's been awesome. She has come in, ears open. What can we do? I mean, we spitball and brainstorm a lot. We're changing things all the time. How can we make it better? She does a really good job, I think, of being involved with programs that may not get the same highlights or the same attention that some of the other sports do. And she's been great. She's actually stepped up and done that, given that same type of effort to other programs or to help at tournaments or whatever that is. She is a resource that gets used a lot, at wrestling tournaments. And certainly by me, I end up being the somewhat of a creative one and say, hey, Kim, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? I saw, Division I program do this on social media. What do you think about making this graphic or whatever it is? And she's always up to the task, from designing singlets to social media to, being in the room. It's been great.
Now, what did she have to train you on when you came back to get the job? Because she's been there 12, you've been there 10.
Well, actually, my first year, she was not here. So, and then that second year was a little bit of feeling out process, I think, for both of us. And she's kind of jumped around a little bit in the department to just go where she's needed. And I think that she, with the previous coach, had some background in wrestling, and then since our time together has really dove in and really learned it, and now she's on NCAA committees for wrestling. So, she certainly helps me out with any organization. She'll take a lot off my plate, so I can worry about the X's and O's and running practices and recruiting and some of those things. So it's been great.
As we look at the makeup of the school, you look at Division II, a lot of talk about Division I, and then the rest of the schools in college wrestling are kind of begging for the scraps and coverage. I always say that Division I wrestling is only about 25% of wrestling. So let's talk about the dynamics of the University of Indianapolis UIndy and what type of situation we're looking at scholarship wise. It's a private college in a world where there is a good mix of private and public schools in Division II. So how does that work with recruiting and how wide of a net does UIndy reach when it comes to bringing kids in?
Well, we're kind of in a unique situation. We have a great location with the city being right here. We're also in a pretty good situation where we're the only Division II program in Indiana that offers wrestling. You have IU and Purdue are the only Division Ones. We're the only Division Two. There's a handful of Division Three, a junior college program, and a couple NAIA programs. So, we traditionally try to kind of stay at home with recruiting, or at least to start my years off 10 years ago. That we hit Indiana hard, tried to stay in state. Indiana is a pretty good state for wrestling, we feel like. And then as over the last 10 years, building networks in Ohio and Michigan and Illinois some, and we have a couple guys from Kentucky now, a wrestler from Pennsylvania. But, we are in a really good situation. We have a great president that believes in athletics. We have an athletic director that supports her coaches. We were able to fundraise, and we have facilities here that are great for wrestling. Midwest Classic, we have 2 gyms attached to each other. We own 6 mats. We'll borrow some from Marion down the road. We have a field house that we have an open tournament in that we could put probably 50 mats in if we needed to. The seating is a little different over there, but it's just great. Division II facilities don't get much better than what we have here at Indianapolis. Our president has fully funded his, I think, second year here. That was something that he pushed for. And so all the programs at the University of Indianapolis are fully funded. But it's not win at all costs. It's we recruit the student athlete. We really push our student athletes to get degrees. That is a focus. So it is a great place to be. I'm fortunate to be at the helm here, and hopefully we can continue to get better and better.
No, you got a national champion in your coaching, I guess, resume there, Nick Walpole. He started out at at Indiana University, and then came over. A lot of people say, "Oh, well, there's D2 guys. Why don't they wrestle D1?" What did you find out from the D1 transfers that you've had come into your program that why D2 was a better fit for them?
Yeah, and our transfers have been local guys. Nick Walpole was my first year he transferred in. His older brother wrestled here. I had known his dad for a long time in the coaching realms, and he actually helped us out for a couple years when Nick was on the roster. As you know, Division II, Division III NAIA are competitive. Probably not as deep as what the Division Ones are. When we are recruiting someone that is looking at both Division I, Division II, the school is a pretty easy sell. So it's a small school. You're going to have 30 or less in a class. I think the latest ratios for teacher student is 16, 17 to 1. It is really a great university. So it's an easy sell academically. You have the city right here. If a elite athlete, elite high school wrestler is looking at the full picture, division, Indianapolis is usually on the radar. So, when you recruit mostly Indiana guys, they see the level of kids that are coming in. There's not a whole lot of, they remember these guys, so you recruit really good elite wrestlers. It helps recruit the next group after them. So we're excited about our next group as well.
Well, let's shift back over to the Midwest Classic just a little bit, and the group that's coming in there. As a coach and as somebody who's got to put all this stuff together in terms of organizing the event, is there any one weight class that stands out to you? Be like, man, if you're just a wrestling fan, not just a D2 wrestling fan, you need to really pay attention to.
Yeah, they're all pretty studly. 125, going through, it's hard. It's so hard to, I think 10 of the 12 top ranked guys or 9 of the top 12 ranked guys are coming in. You have a, returning finalist. You have, some guys that are coming off of injuries from last year that are back in the mix. You have some guys shifting down weight classes at, 165. You have a kid from McKendree that's second rate at 174 that's dropping a weight class. You have some guys that, weren't available first semester that are coming in. 184 shifting up to be a tough weight class there. 174 is real. I mean, it's. I could talk about any of these weight classes. It's going to be a good weekend.
Yeah, just looking at those preliminary numbers, like I was talking about earlier, and just hinting at them. Here the breakdown. I think we got 8 at 125, 8 at 149, 9 at 184, and 7 at 197. Those are the number of nationally ranked wrestlers at the weight class. And remember, that's out of 12 per weight. And I'm going to just circle back to 125 because while we got a lot of UIndy chatter here, there is still some feel-good stories out there, including the top-ranked guy in the country, Malik Williams, who was second last year at the Midwest Classic. This is a guy who I had on the show a couple years ago. He went to the national tournament after having a stroke in the same season. I mean, are you kidding me? That's just a crazy story. And to see a kid like that just come back from that type of thing, and he's still wrestling. He's still competing at a high level.
Yeah, Malik is fun to watch. In fact, last year's finals between Jaquez from Lindenwood and Malik at Upper Iowa was instant classic. I actually think that Jaquez has the last 2 wins, maybe the only 2 wins in that series. So that one's going to be fun to watch if it happens. So yeah, we actually wrestled Malik that year at the Nationals with I believe Josh Kiefer, and remember hearing that story and how incredible that is. So.
It's pretty wild. Now, let's just jump up to heavyweight because that's where you've got a top dog, Dylan Falkenberg here. Heavyweight in Division II is kind of one of those things where you look back in like 2012 on. I mean, there was a line there. You had Mueller's in there. You had Tyrell Fortson in there. I mean, it was a Ziad Haydad from Kutztown. Yeah, it was a minefield at heavyweight for a couple of years. And, you got a guy, Falkenberg. Tell me about his background and what you expect out of him this year.
Yeah, he's the local guy. Last year, he was actually undefeated through Midwest. He won the tournament last year. He beat a very good Central Oklahoma kid. There's a Finley kid that was in the bracket that we saw several times that year, and he wrestled a kid from Newman in the finals. The Upper Iowa kid was, I believe, ranked second, maybe going into the tournament. He had a great tournament last year. Now this year, he's already wrestled 1 and 2 in the nation, returning national champ and runner-up. And he unfortunately dropped those 2. But it's kind of one of those things where you want to see that competition so you can make improvements, so we can hit the big stage with that experience and making those adjustments. So, but he's one of the hardest workers that I've ever coached. I'm fortunate here to have some really good heavyweight coaches. Bob Brubeck, my longtime assistant, was a heavyweight wrestler. He actually went to Heidelberg, a D3 school in Ohio. He's an Indianapolis guy growing up, and so he's been with me. We've had some great heavyweights under his tutelage. And then Evan Wooding, a 2014 All-American, is also on staff. And those guys, that group of 3 is fun to watch. They're all very different styles. Falkenberg may be the most athletic kid that we have on our team. He would have had the option to go play baseball or football in college as well. So we're fortunate that he stuck with wrestling. And, we're just looking to kind of close out his career on a high note.
Jumping into the Division III landscape as a whole, you had mentioned that Division II is going from 4 regions to 6. More qualifiers it's up to 180. And as you alluded to, seeding, which is always going to be a fun situation. Now, what are your thoughts on how the regional makeup went down, and what do you think about the positive growth that we're seeing in Division II that finally led to more qualifiers?
Right, and that's been a big push. Every year at the national tournament, we have our meeting, and that's always the thing that most coaches are pushing for. That's the one thing that's kind of non-changing is we want more qualifiers. We want more qualifiers, and especially with Division II growing and adding teams, the time was kind of now. And so I anticipate that there's going to be some shuffling in the next couple of years where there may be some growth in the East or growth in the North that shuffles some teams around. But 18 is not necessarily a clean bracket. but it was one of those things where uh, we want to push for that change. And so, we would have asked for more qualifiers, go 20 qualifiers or that type of thing, go keep with the 4 regions and go 5 qualifiers from each region. But, one of the things that in order to make this change happen, I feel like it had to make sense financially as well. So the regional tournaments went from 2-day regional tournaments to 1-day tournament. That cuts costs a little bit for programs. And then, the 3, you won't have a true 4th match. There's some benefits to that formula. And then, of course, you have to seed the national tournament. So with 18 in a bracket.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see in terms of that. Now, for years, I remember I was actually the first time I met Jackie was down at the Division IIs at what was famously known as the Riot at the Hyatt when the Division II festival was in Houston. And, we saw the makeup of tournaments there, and then they were separated. Me and Kyle Klingman went 3-2 to 1. Now, 2 and 3 have been sitting on the same weekend for the last several years. Personally, I'd like to see them separated, although I do get an opportunity to do the NAIA tournament as a result of that separation. I don't have an overlap there. But, Division II, Division III the same weekend. Would you like to see them split up?
Yeah, I think, we always talk about we need good officials, and there are some good officials. But, then you're separating your field a little bit there, and maybe that's an opportunity to get more experience for some of these younger officials, and maybe it'll end up being a good thing. But I know, sometimes you're looking forward to certain officials being there, or you trust these guys, and then you hear, well, they're going to D3s, and I'm sure D3s feel the same way about some of the officials that come to D2. So that would be nice. And then the other thing too is just like you're talking about is wrestling fans are wrestling fans. You want to see good wrestling. You're asking fans to pick between the two. And so D2s would benefit from being on a separate weekend from D3s, and I'm sure Division 3s would as well.
Well, and also putting them away from the Division I qualifier weekend. This year the calendar falls a little funny, so I know that I'll be announcing Division 3s, whereas in the state, and that's in Roanoke, Virginia, whereas the EWL is in Fairfax, Virginia. The ACC's in Blacksburg, Virginia, about 20 minutes away from D3s, and then the MAC is in Norfolk, Virginia. So you got 4 college tournaments in one state in the same weekend. So wrestling fans are split everywhere. This particular way the calendar falls this year, more so than usual.
Right. Yeah, and I know we were I serve on the NCAA Rules Committee, and we were all talking there, and when Tim Shields and his group came in, and we're kind of talking through that, we all are scratching our head going, oh my gosh, what does that mean for officials? We're going to have they're going to be spread pretty thin, and then just like you said, the wrestling fans are going to be spread pretty thin too. There's a lot of great wrestling happening that weekend.
Getting back to the Midwest Classic again, because we keep going back and forth. There's so many different topics to discuss here. I want to bring Jackie back into the fray because she's done, a lion's share of the research here, if not 100% of the share of the research here. But Jackie, what are some of the most interesting things you found in researching the Midwest Classic that, and its relevance not just to the University of Indianapolis, but D2 wrestling as a whole?
I think that it's really interesting to look at the longevity of some of the programs. And in addition, I really enjoyed seeing the correlations between Midwest and Nationals. I cross-referenced all of the Midwest brackets with the Nationals brackets from each of those years as well, and was able to find a lot of cool stuff in terms of the number of national qualifiers that wrestled in Midwest, the number of national champs that wrestled in Midwest. And it's really cool to think about, all of the national champions that have come across our mats and then gone on to win a national championship, or even as Jason mentioned before about the, those who've gone on to be national champions who haven't placed or who haven't won Midwest. And I think that's really interesting. One of my favorites was looking at some of the actual historical pieces, and we did a father-son feature on a pair of guys that the father, Ted Price, who was a national champion for Wisconsin Parkside, his son, Connor Price, wrestled in Midwest last year and placed. And so being able to look at some of the history of our Division II programs along with the history of the tournament has been really fun.
And two names that jumped out, the two four-time champs, Mike Labry from Ashland, and a guy I knew from his time from middle school wrestling. His name actually got mentioned on a show 2 episodes ago when we were talking about middle school wrestling in the Virginia Challenge. Arsenio Barksdale, a Virginia kid, goes out to Adams State. To hear Jason Ramstetter tell that story about how he went to the school sight unseen, he ends up being a 4-time champ. So very, very different cross-section of wrestling here.
We actually will have features coming out Wednesday and Thursday on each of those guys. I actually did Q&As with both of them about being 4-timers and, about the championship match, about their championship matches and about the tournament itself. So, there have been 55 4-time placers in the tournament over 39 years and only 2 4-time champions. So that's pretty significant.
And if memory serves, they're both 4-time Division II All-Americans. I know Barksdale is. I'm pretty sure Labry is too.
Yes, Labry is too. Labry actually went 4-3-2-1 in terms of the NCAA championship.
Just from a stats nerd perspective, that's one of those things. It's like 4-3-2-1. That it makes you wonder how many other people have ever done that. So I'm sure that's something that jumps out.
Well, it was funny. His coach Josh Hutchins and I were standing there before he went out for his championship, and he's a real quiet guy. And Josh and I were sort of talking about the 4-3-2-1, and we both were just like, "Well, you got to go finish it now. Like, there's only one way to finish this now." And he sort of gave us a little smirk. And then when he came back through, he said, "He's like, well, I guess I finished it how everybody wanted me to." And so we thought that was pretty funny too.
Josh, we're going to start chatting with Jackie about some of the projects that she's doing with Division II history. Do you have anything to add about the UIndy program or the Midwest Classic before we go stats nerd on people?
You have my permission to go stats nerd.
All right, all right, Jackie, you ready for this? All right, okay, so let's get some background. We've kind of buried the lead when it comes to what Jackie's been doing, but you're a Butler grad, which doesn't have wrestling, and during a championship at the Division I level, March Madness weekend back in 2011, I was not very happy with anybody from Butler University on a tip-in that was constantly shown again and again on SportsCenter against said alma mater. That being said, had to get the Butler shot in there. So discovering wrestling, what was your background in wrestling before taking the reins at UIndy in a sports info role with the sport?
Well, the funny thing was I had no background in wrestling before coming to UIndy. I actually am from a really small town in Illinois where there isn't a wrestling program probably at a high school within 20, 25 miles. They actually have a program now as a co-op with another school since I've left. And there's only 300 kids in the whole high school. So I had no background at all. And obviously Butler doesn't have a wrestling program, so had no background in working in anything in sports at Butler. Came here and was a graduate assistant in sports information in 2007 and actually was given wrestling as my winter sport. UIndy sponsors track and field, cross country, swimming and diving, and both men's and women's basketball and wrestling in the winter. And I got winter as my winter sport was wrestling and knew nothing about it. Former coach Terry Weatherald and Jay Yates actually sat me down with, who is coincidentally our program leader in wins, Shane Perkey, who was a 4-time All-American for us. And he sat and just told me crash course in wrestling in one day. We were hosting the Indiana Little State tournament and he was working a table and I sat with him all day long and he taught me all about scoring, different positions that guys were going into and just told me everything there was in his brain basically that day. And it's just sort of evolved into this thing that I do every day now. And it's a great part of my life and I enjoy it so much.
For a sport that bases itself on being so simple, hand-to-hand combat, one versus the other, the better person wins, there are certainly a lot of nuances with the sport. What were some of the ones that probably took you a little longer to grasp coming from the outside and jumping into it feet first?
Well, obviously the biggest issue I think that anybody who is involved with wrestling talks about is the is just an average fan walking in and not understanding the scoring, not understanding that when the ref puts a fist up, what stalling is, not understanding some of those rules, that those rules that you see and that you literally will look at somebody and be like, what just happened? What just happened? Why was the match stopped?
That was an illegal fist to the back is what that was. No,
Yeah,
wait, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Or, the hands to the face. I have a couple of young ladies that work with me, and they didn't understand, what was being called with the hands to the face this year.
Did I just hear Jason sigh when you said hand to the face in the background?
You did actually just hear Jason sigh.
Oh, man. That's going to have to be another show entirely. I think that's collectively the biggest groan of the year, but continue.
It's been interesting. I watched a duel the first weekend of competition, and it was called 3 times in that duel. And it was just this crazy thing that then everybody's freaking out about. And I was like, oh no, this has got the ability to be something that's quite an issue. And then we went into our first weekend of competition, and how it was called was really interesting too.
Well, okay, moving forward, I know there's also one thing, your role in, just looking at stuff in promoting this Midwest Classic, but you've jumped on not just a proposal, but actually you're working on your doctorate here. So wrestling's a part of that. You've kind of shared the idea with me, but just share with the wrestling community a little bit about how wrestling is kind of a focal point in you earning your doctorate.
So what I'm looking to do for my dissertation, and I've spoken with a handful of coaches around the country about this, actually came up with the idea through a conversation with Mike Denny over at Maryville, who virtually everyone in the wrestling world knows, just at lunch one day. And I was at lunch in St. Louis, and we were talking about what I was going to do for my dissertation, and came up with the idea that, I wanted to do something obviously with wrestling, because it is such a passion of mine and such a big part of my life, and decided on looking at Division II wrestling and sort of looking at the fluctuation in Division II wrestling over the last about 3 decades. Sort of since Title IX, I've done a ton of research on Title IX as well as a part of my doctoral work, and sort of where do those two marry, and what were the causes of Division II wrestling having such a fluctuation. We were down to 39 programs in Division II wrestling in the early 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000s. Now we're going to be up 65 and above in the next coming years, with programs that we're going to be having coming back online or coming online as new programs. So what is the cause of that? And, what is the cause of the resurgence? And then also fitting a little bit of how women's wrestling fits in there in terms of the Title IX conversation.
And it's also kind of interesting when much of the Title IX battle, so to speak, has been fought by wrestling coaches, and it's interesting. You have a senior women's administrator working on a doctorate involves Title IX, and you're looking at it from the wrestling perspective, which some people might look at and be like, wait, that's not how that usually works.
I get that a lot, actually. I get that a lot. Jason gets that a lot. My AD also gets that a lot. And I think that I was told by some folks at the NWCA that that's why they're interested in my proposal, because I am a female, I am a senior woman administrator, and I want to come at it from that way, from a wrestling perspective. And I want to be able to provide a different perspective, one, for wrestling, who has always been seen as sort of this villain in terms of Title IX, and then also from the Title IX perspective, which has in turn been seen as a villain to wrestling.
In your research, it seems like the blaming of Title IX has really kind of gone on a decline the last maybe 5-10 years. Is that something that you found in your research, without giving actually the whole point of your research away? But
absolutely. No, it definitely, the blaming of Title IX has sort of gone away, and I just honestly think that's because of a shift in thought on Title IX, and also a better understanding of Title IX. There are 3 prongs in which a school can be compliant with Title IX, and most people, however, believe the myth of that you can only be compliant by prong 1, which is proportionality, which virtually any school that has football is never going to be compliant by proportionality. And especially with the amount of females that attend college versus the number of males. And so it's just a better understanding that there are other ways to be compliant via the other prongs, and also much more of a shift of Title IX from the athletic world to much more of a spotlight on the sexual assault and sexual violence protections that Title IX provide those on college campuses.
Yeah, that's one thing, because I know people that that know my Twitter engagements with one Title IX pioneer, Nancy Hogshead Makar, and now I'm not going to argue. Well, one, she's blocked me, so that's another point. But I'm not going to engage with a Title IX discussion right now because of so much about the sexual assault side of things. So basically, it's like we're not going to sit there and argue Title IX now because there's because it can even you don't care about sexual. That's you don't want to go down that road, even though that's not what you would be saying. It's one of those things. Now, one thing I am curious about is maybe the demographics of the Division II schools. Are you finding that it's been private, it's been public, it's been football, it's been non-football? I mean, is there any trends that have emerged early in your research that said this is the type of school that's been dropping it and this is the type of school that's been adding it?
A lot. It is the programs with football that were sort of dropping, and it was usually coupled not just wrestling, usually another sport or two as well, always with budgetary issues as a reasoning. And those that have been adding, it's been from an enrollment perspective, and it's been a lot of privates, small privates, not very dissimilar from UIndy, that have been adding it as an enrollment piece to bring a new group of students to their campus, which I think is great. And I know that that's been great for us. We have rosters of about 40 each year and 40 great guys. And to have the opportunity to bring those guys to your campus, I think is terrific. And then also with the addition of women's wrestling, an opportunity to bring those young women to your campus too.
And also from a Division II standpoint, let's look at the Great Lakes Valley Conference, for example. Bellarmine has added it. Drury has added it. You guys have it. Maryville has added it. McKendree reclassified from the NAIA. You're also Truman's still fighting to keep their program. Wheeling Jesuit. I mean, we got just these programs. This whole conference basically. These are schools that didn't have wrestling that long ago.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Within the GLVC, we are actually the program with probably the most longevity. Our program began in 1956. So I would say of those 7 GLVC schools, we probably for sure have the most longevity. With Parkside leaving the conference, I would say that's a definite.
Yes, and that was back when the school was known as Indiana Central. So if you're doing any Division II research, or even that would predate the college division back then. You look at through these results, like what the heck is Indiana Central?
Central, exactly. And I actually just finished some work with the NWCA to get all of those brackets put online so that everybody can access them.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I know, not to interrupt you there, but you talked about Parkside, and Coach Cook was tragically killed in a car accident, or as a result of a car accident in St. Louis a couple years ago. And this guy was a records-keeping dream in terms of research. And it's talk about point A to point B on how you helped get these brackets to the point where they're soon to be online, similar to how Division I has had with what the late Jay Hammond did with WrestlingStats.com.
So we, over the summer when I decided I wanted to really take on this dissertation project of wrestling, it's always been in the back of my mind to, one, create a Midwest Classic record book, and to, two, really establish a history for Division II wrestling. That's something that, Jason, you've done tons of research as well. You know that the history is not really accessible.
And trust me, folks, I will be working with Jackie on this project quite a bit after she gets everything done. So I'm stoked. I am stoked to hear about this. So I hope you fans are too.
I knew you would be, and really the stats geek in me is so excited about it. So Coach Cook had been able to compile all the Midwest brackets for me when he was alive, and so I actually have copies of each of the Midwest brackets with a huge thanks to him. And so knowing that knowledge, when I was looking at this Division II project, and after talking with the NCAA and figuring out that they didn't have all of them, contacted Craig Becker up at Parkside and asked if he and his brother Nick and their head coach Corey Van Grohl wouldn't mind looking through the filing cabinets up there in Craig's office and seeing what they could find. And they actually found a stack of paper probably 2 feet high that I actually drove up to Parkside and got. And went through the process then of scanning all those brackets and creating PDFs out of them so that we could then put them online and let people use them. I had them in a Google folder for a long time and had people direct messaging me on Twitter from all over the place, asking for access just because they were looking for missing national qualifiers or someone from their family. And that's what I was trying to do. That's why I wanted that to be accessible for those people like that. And to find, those national qualifiers that programs may not have kept the best records about, and to be able to let these programs honor their history.
Yeah, and I was doing that when I was building the. I go through and I look at the database that I have with the Matt Talk Almanac, almanac.mattalkonline.com, with some of the stuff that it's like a sandbox. And I discovered St. John Fisher, a school in New York, a Division III school. They had an All-American that was misattributed to St. John's in Minnesota. And I'm going through and I'm like looking through the old amateur wrestling news, and the way and I set their SID in note. I'm like, hey, you guys can add another sport and another All-American to your list, even though they don't have wrestling anymore. It was like, hey, yeah, check this out. It was like, those are like little wins. You do something, you dig something else that nobody else has even taken the time to look. It's like something cool about research. Like, I have found something nobody else in the history of the world has found.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I'm working on now sort of expanding this to, I want to include all of the all academic records, and I want to include the rankings. So I have Mike Kirk from Central Oklahoma has emailed me all of his history.
Wait. All the D2 rankings of all. Oh boy, yeah. So we're gonna be nerd alerting quite frequently the next couple of years, because I've got all the D1 coaches polls. Now I just need to work on the other divisions.
Yes, exactly. So I have all that now, and so I'm working on organizing that. And then Nate and I at the NWCA will work on getting all those online for everybody to be able to reference and use as well.
Oh, Geek Central. I love it. So, let's see. How do we wrap this up without, seriously, I could talk about stats and just all this stuff forever. Because, yeah, this is like, you should see me and Jackie's Twitter back and forth when she discovered this. It was just like, are you kidding me? What? And then it's like, hey, this isn't this. We need to, just being able to like just get the gears rolling. I had to drop everything I was doing. I was like, okay, how can we, I got to stop doing what I'm doing. I can't look at this for another couple months. Let's go back. Because I was going through the hometowns, because, I was doing a hometown. I've got every hometown of every All-American at every level, except I'm working through junior college right now. But, oh man, just putting together records based on, printed, handwritten bracket sheets that thankfully somebody had the wherewithal and the presence of mind to keep. Oh boy.
Exactly.
All right, Jackie, any final thoughts on, things about wrestling that you've learned over the years, or your role in sports information and maybe educating others that are getting in the field? Whereas, the sports information field, sometimes you get hit with the winter sport that you've, by experience, you've never covered. And some people look at it as like, all right, I just got to get through wrestling season so I can get to my favorite sport of baseball or something like that.
I would say just have an open mind. I just wish more people would have an open mind to our sport. And I really think that if more people would have an open mind, wrestling's fan base would be every sports fan in America, because the work that's put in, the athleticism that is shown, just the trials and tribulations that these kids go through, the injuries, and the pure amount of work and pure amount of heart is something that is unmatched to me. And I didn't know that 10 years ago. And by having an open mind and really allowing myself to fall in love with this sport is just it's opened up an entire new world to me. Midwest is my favorite weekend of the year, and Nationals is probably my second, because I get to see people and talk wrestling that I don't get to see all the time. And that is just so enjoyable to me. And being able to see student athletes that I don't see all the time, and, finding out how their seasons are going, and just really being an advocate for Division II wrestling is sort of what this has turned into. And I couldn't be happier about it.
Love it. I could be happy that people like you are in the sport and doing research, not just for your own program, but the entire sport as a whole. So Jackie Paquette and then Jason Warthan. I am assuming he's probably gone to lunch, but
he went to give a final, actually.
Went to give a final, yes. So again, Midwest Classic coming up, and what is it? Is it Nickerson? Is that how you say it? I should have probably done the research there.
Nickerson Hall.
Nickerson Hall, University of Indianapolis, UIndy. Midwest Classic, December 15th and 16th at Midwest_Classic, hashtag NWC40. And I'm pretty sure we're streaming all this live, right?
Yes, we are. We'll be live on TrackCast, on Track Wrestling, all 8 mats, all weekend.
Awesome. Jackie, thanks for the time. I am educationally geeking out.
Same. Thank you, Jason.
The Short Time Wrestling Podcast is proudly outfitted by Compound Clothing. Shirts, singlets, custom gear orders, everything you need. Call up Cliff and the crew at cmpteamwear.com. First time listening? Well, you can change that by going to mattalkonline.com/getshorttime to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or listen on your favorite podcatcher at mattalkonline.com/listen.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to mattalkonline.com.